More depth for the Bucs as they agree to a deal with Tavierre Thomas. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with my everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. A few names left that I really like for the Buccaneers in free agency, and the Saints make a move that some Bucs fans will hate, but I think is honestly pretty irrelevant. All of that is coming up a little bit later. First, let's start with the latest move by the Buccaneers, and that is agreeing to terms with cornerback Tavierre Thomas. I mentioned on Monday's live episode that the Bucs were hosting Tavierre Thomas for a visit per Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, and shortly after I finished that live episode, it was announced that the Bucs and Thomas reached an agreement. Now, I also misspoke. I have to own this one. And I said that Thomas was a former Lions cornerback, and for that, I do apologize. I had Lions on the brain because Fowler had reported that Thomas was also meeting with the Lions, but Thomas played his first 3 years in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns before joining the Houston Texans in 2021 and playing in Houston for the last 3 seasons. Over the span of 6 years, Thomas has started 22 games. 19 of those were during his time in Houston, with a career-high 8 starts in 2021 when he had 2 interceptions, a touchdown, a forced fumble, 1 tackle for loss, and 86 tackles. For his career, he has 2 interceptions, 6 passes defensed, 6 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, 1 sack, 6 tackles for loss, and 225 total tackles. Last season, he allowed 78.8% of passes thrown towards him to be completed. That was the second worst production of his career, or the second highest completion percentage allowed in his career, however you want to phrase it. But over his 6 seasons, he's allowing a completion percentage of 69.4% when targeted, with his best season coming in 2021, which was really that standout season, his first year with Houston. And he allowed just 61.9% of passes to be completed. He's allowed only 3 touchdown catches when targeted in his career. Never has he allowed more than 1 in a season, and he is allowing, over the course of his career, 9.01 yards per completion. Thomas played 60% of defensive snaps each of the last 2 years for Houston, while playing at least 54% of special team snaps during his 3 years there. But that's primarily where he played when he was in Cleveland the first 3 years of his career, taking over 80% of special teams snaps in his second and third years in the NFL. I talked about it on yesterday's show that if Thomas were to come in, he is a depth guy. He's a little bit smaller than the typical Todd Bowles corner. He's 5'10", little over 200 pounds. But with the addition of Bryce Hall, plus Zion McCollum and Jamel Dean, and then you have Christian Izien, who I think Bowles may move back to safety as things stand right now, just given the limited depth that they have among the safeties. But he was a stud for the Bucs as their nickel corner last year, and I think they might try to find a way to keep him there unless Hall is able to beat him out in a competition. I know, I believe it's Our Lads already has Thomas slotted in as the starting nickel corner. I don't see him starting over Christian Izien if that is the case. But as far as corners are concerned, just as a whole, you have Zion and you have Jamel as your starters. You have Bryce Hall, Josh Hayes, Quandre Mosley, Keenan Isaac, and now Thomas. I didn't include Christian Izien in that because we're still not sure if he's going to be the safety or a slot corner, but those are the surefire, absolutely 100% positive corners in this Bucs defense right now on the depth chart. So it's still a pretty shallow position group if someone goes down, which we probably know at some point Jamel Dean is going to go down with an injury of some sort and miss at least one game. But last year, you had Zion McCollum, who came in and took over a starting role, whether it was Carlton Davis, who was missing time, or Jamel Dean, who was missing time. And those 9 starts that Zion McCollum had showed the Buccaneers enough that they had the confidence in him to move on from Davis and help them alleviate some of the cap constraints that they were under, while knowing that they already had a starter in waiting. But that also eliminated your best depth piece at the position. That's why they've gone out and gotten Bryce Hall. That's why they've gone out and gotten this agreement with Tavierre Thomas, because they have to build that depth back up now. I mean, think about those other names that I just said. Josh Hayes, who was basically special teams last year, Quandre Mosley, and Keenan Isaac. If Zion McCollum or Jamel Dean go down, are you going to trust Quandre Mosley to come in and be the starter against the Falcons or against the Eagles or, against the Cowboys? Like, you're not trusting that guy to step in and be a starter for you. The Bucs have to continue to build up that depth. And then, of course, you're going to have competition for the slot corner. You're going to have position for basically the next man up on the depth chart, whether it's Jamel that goes down or Zion that goes down. Hopefully neither do, but it's just a part of the game. And we saw a lot of injuries to the Bucs secondary last year. And that's why you see them building up this depth within the secondary. So they have plenty of bodies in the cornerback room, but they still don't have a lot of depth. And it certainly isn't a position that they're going to shy away from in the NFL draft coming up next month if the opportunity is there to get someone that they think can come in and fit their system well and be able to step in and really be a contributor in the secondary. So you're seeing that getting beefed up. You have the addition of Hall, you have the addition of Thomas, you have the addition of Whitehead on the back end. And we're going to talk about a lot of those moves that the Buccaneers have already made. But are there any more players lurking out there in free agency that would be worth bringing in? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I love taking advantage of the flash deals when the event that I'm going to gets closer, but there's no doubt my favorite feature is the view from your seat, so I know exactly what I'm paying for, and I'm not surprised when I get to the venue. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps, and I love being able to use Apple Pay right there on the app to secure my seats. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Every dayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow. I should be joined by Evan Klosky, and we're going to continue to get his thoughts coming out of the big week that was free agency and heading into draft season. But as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, be the first to get the local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offseason so far looks a little something like this. Mike Evans re-signed. Baker Mayfield re-signed. Antoine Winfield Jr. franchise tagged. Levante David re-signed. Greg Gaines re-signed. Chase McLaughlin, Chase Edmonds, John Wolford, Justin School, all re-signed. Then they bring in Jordan Whitehead on a 2-year deal. They signed cornerback Breece Hall. They agreed to a deal with Tavierre Thomas. They agreed to a deal with Ben Bredesen and agreed to a deal with Sua Opeta. So 3 players brought in the secondary and 2 along the offensive line to go along with all their in-house players that they are bringing back. But are there any other free agents that would be worth the Bucs bringing in for a visit, talking to, and then potentially adding to the roster? At this point, you're really starting to see things slow way down. We see this every year. There's that initial spike right when free agency starts. Things slow down again after about a week. Everybody goes into draft mode. You see the NFL draft. And then you get that second wave. So the Bucs, outside of Whitehead, have been focusing on depth pieces with a couple of guys that may be able to compete for starting jobs. As far as big name players out there, you have Mike Williams, David Bakhtiari, if he's able to play, Xavier Howard, Jamal Adams, J.C. Jackson, Emmanuel Ogbah, Justin Simmons, Carl Lawson, Randy Gregory, Adoree Jackson, Josh Reynolds, Ezekiel Elliott. But for the most part, and of course, some of those guys are bigger in name than they are in production anymore. But for the most part, you're looking at role players and depth at this stage of free agency. And we're going to see free agency cool off until after the draft. Then once the draft hits, teams know what they have, what they still need. You're going to see that second wave of free agency where teams are filling out the rest of their roster with cost-effective players, depth guys. You might find a diamond in the rough at that point, but who is worth looking at if you are the Buccaneers? And I think the best position for the Bucs, if you're going to look for a legitimate contributor beyond just a depth or a rotational piece, is wide receiver, since they really need to upgrade that wide receiver 3 role. And of course, I mentioned Van Jefferson again on Friday's live episode. And then within an hour of that episode ending, he ends up signing with the Steelers. I thought the ties to Liam Cohen might attract him to the Bucs. Other people, and I mentioned this as well, other people were pointing out his ties to basically the Falcons staff, getting to stay there, play with Kirk Cousins. You know, that was an intriguing option. Instead, he's going to Pittsburgh to play with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. I don't know. But that's where he ended up. But someone in the chat of that episode mentioned Josh Reynolds, which I really like that idea. He's 29 years old, and SpotTrack has an estimated market value of $7 million on him. I don't think he's getting $7 million at this point. Not at this stage in the game. Not for what he brings to a team. Now, he may opt to return to Detroit where there's some familiarity, but I don't think there are any teams that are going to give him a run at the wide receiver 2 spot, because that's just not who he is. He is a situational, rotational wide receiver. He is a wide receiver 3 at best for about 31 out of 32 teams in the NFL. But a couple of other wide receivers that I was looking at that I think would complement Evans and Godwin really well are Hunter Renfrow, Paris Campbell, Olamide Zaccheaus, Equimonius St. Brown, and Quez Watkins. I think all of these guys are solid wide receiver 3 options. And you're going to have to bear with me because for as long as Zaccheaus played for Atlanta, every time I tweeted out from the Bucs Nation account, when he made a reception, I always called him zucchinis because I wasn't going to learn how to spell Zaccheaus. I just wasn't going to do it. So I called him zucchinis. But the first name that I mentioned was Hunter Renfrow. And I know some of you immediately went, oh, James, no. But listen, Renfrow got a mega deal after he broke out in 2021, where he had 1,038 yards and 9 touchdowns. But he's never been in that same stratosphere as far as the rest of his seasons compared to 2021 are. Outside of 2021, his career high was 656 yards, and he doesn't have 9 touchdowns in all of his other seasons combined. His career high outside of 2021 was 4 touchdown receptions. So that's why the Raiders moved on from him and that contract that they gave him. But that contract was a mistake, and we all said it was a mistake at the time that they made it, because Renfrow is not a number 2 wide receiver. And you can point to the fact that he hasn't had much in the way of coaching or a quarterback over the last 2 years either. But the Raiders expected him to be that number 2 guy after that 2021 season to Devontae Adams, and that's not who he is. Coming in as the number 3 with Evans and Godwin, I think would work really well. He's a pretty reliable receiver. He's had his ups and downs. He definitely struggled with the Raiders. Fresh start, fresh scenery, new offense. I think he could get back to who he was. And if you go back to when Renfrow was drafted, David and I were at the combine talking about him. He was best friends with Adam Humphries. And we were talking about, could you come into the Buccaneers and almost, replace Adam Humphries, who ended up going to the Tennessee Titans that same offseason. But there was a lot of buzz around Renfrow and how he could fit in with the Buccaneers. I think he still can, even though it's a different regime. It's a different offense than it was back then. I think Renfrow would be a pretty affordable and reliable wide receiver 3. Gives Baker kind of a move the sticks kind of guy that isn't named Chris Godwin. But beyond Renfrow, I listed Campbell, Zaccheaus, St. Brown, and Watkins. And all of these, again, are affordable guys that have shown that they can get the job done if they are in the right situation. So I looked at Paris Campbell, and you guys remember he was, relatively highly regarded coming out of Ohio State. And he showed flashes at times in Indianapolis, but could never really get it all together. At the same time, he had no quarterback throughout his career in Indianapolis. And then he goes to the New York Giants after they give Daniel Jones the mega contract. And that was a disaster because Daniel Jones is a disaster. So Campbell had no chance last year. He brings an element that the Bucs are missing, and that is a big target that can stretch the field. You look at Trey Palmer and Devin Tompkins as guys that can stretch the field. They're smaller guys. So Paris Campbell gives Baker Mayfield a bigger body to be able to work with over the middle of the field, but also can stretch the field and open things up underneath for Mike, Chris, Cade Otton in those situations. So he was highly touted coming out of Ohio State, runs a 4.3 40. That is some blazing speed, and he could explode for the Bucs as a deep threat and have little to no burden to carry because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are there. I mean, this poor guy, he's had Jacoby Brissett, a broken Phillip Rivers in the last year of his career, Carson Wentz, busted old Matt Ryan, and Daniel Jones as his quarterbacks since entering the NFL. Give this guy an opportunity, and I think he's going to surprise you. And I think you would be able to get him for probably under $3 million guaranteed. You may be looking at a contract worth up to $3.5 million with incentives. It's a low risk, high reward move. And you know what? If he doesn't work out, you still have Devin Tompkins. You still have Trey Palmer. You still have Raheem Jarrett that you can then move into the wide receiver 3 spot. But I think the Bucs still need an upgrade because I still look at, as much as Palmer and Tompkins and Jarrett have shown little flashes, I think you need someone a little bit more reliable that's not so situational the way Palmer, Tompkins, and Jarrett are. So those are some of the guys that I am looking at, but I think we can stop arguing about whether or not the Bucs should sign Chase Young. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. Wrapping things up here on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Bucs. And look, sometimes you just have to stand your ground. That's where I am today. I was actually talking to one of the insiders about it. We were joking around, having a nice little conversation right before I hit record. But there was someone in the live chat yesterday that could not let go of the fact that I said that Chase Young is not a player that I am interested in for the Buccaneers because he's overrated. He's going to get overpaid. And I said he's not a Batman. He's a Robin. And I was told that I didn't like big name talent, which is ridiculous because the Bucs have had and still have plenty of big name talent. I have covered plenty of big name talent. I just think that Young is only a name and not a talent. Well, I guess we're going to see who was right because the Bucs will now be facing Chase Young twice a year since he agreed on a 1-year deal worth up to $13 million with the New Orleans Saints. All right, here's the thing. Chase Young is a legend in his own mind, and he wanted to play with Cam Jordan, which is fitting because both of them are essentially insufferable. But tell me, is Young really going to make the Saints pass rush one that you are scared of as a Buccaneers fan? You want to know who the Bucs' leading sacker was last season? It was Yaya Diaby, who had 7.5 sacks, and he played 46% of defensive snaps on the season. 7.5 sacks is Chase Young's career high. He had 7.5 in his rookie season. Then he had 7.5 split between the Commanders and the Niners last season. He had 1.5 sacks in 9 games in 2021, 0 sacks in 3 games that he played in 2022, and he has 1 season with double-digit tackles for loss, and that was in 2020 when he had 10. Outside of his rookie year, he has not broken 30 total tackles in a season. His missed tackle percentage last year, 10.7%. That's not a pretty number. This is why I said that the Buccaneers should steer clear of Chase Young. He is not who he was at Ohio State. He isn't even who he was in his rookie year for the Washington football team when he trotted off the field, heading to the tunnel saying, "I want Tom. Give me Tom." Well, How'd that work out for you there, Chase? He's a single-digit sack guy that wants attention and wants to be paid like he's a Bosa or he's a Watt or he's Micah Parsons. And now it's the Saints that are going to be on the hook for him this season. And a contract worth up to $13 million. I'm really interested to see what the guaranteed money is in that and what kind of incentives there will be, because I get the feeling that you're probably looking at less than half of that being actual salary. That is going to be an incentive-laden deal for a guy who has done nothing in the NFL except underachieve compared to his collegiate production and his draft status. This, again, is why I said Chase Young is not the guy for the Buccaneers. He is not Jason Pierre-Paul when Jason Light traded for him. He is not who Shaq Barrett turned out to be. He's probably not even Yaya Diaby. And the Bucs can use pick number 26 to get a player that will put up better numbers in Todd Bowles' defense than Chase Young. They can get a Jared Verse. They can get a Chop Robinson. They can find an edge rusher that they can plug and play that will do better than Chase Young this season. Because Chase Young does not elevate. Chase Young does not command the attention that Jason Pierre-Paul used to, or Shaq Barrett used to, or that TJ Watt does, or Micah Parsons, or or Nick or Joey Bosa. But he thinks that he does. Maybe it's because he went to Ohio State like the Bosas went to Ohio State, so he thinks he's that dude. But to me, I'm glad that he signed somewhere. I didn't even care where it was because I was sick of having people in the chat talk about, oh, we should bring in Chase Young. No, too expensive for lack of production. If you are going to overpay someone for single-digit sacks, just keep Shaq Barrett. And I hope Shaq has a wonderful bounce-back year and gets back to those double-digit sack seasons with Miami this year that we saw in Tampa, because Shaq is a wonderful person. He is a wonderful person with a wonderful family that helped bring a Super Bowl to Tampa Bay. But you couldn't justify the cost for the production that you had last year, and now the Saints are turning around and paying Chase Young that kind of money, and they're going to get similar production to what Shaq Barrett did last year. He's going to be a single-digit sack guy. He's going to have little to no effect on the vast majority of games. And again, if I'm wrong, I'll own it. Most of you know that I was all over saying that I would not draft CJ Stroud. I wouldn't do it. I think CJ Stroud is going to bust. He proved me wrong. I've eaten the crow. I'm still right about Justin Fields, though. Still right about Justin Fields. He was garbage from the moment he was drafted. And yeah, he's not going to get any better. And if I'm wrong, you guys can rip me up and down in the comment section of the immediate reaction episodes after Saints games. If he balls out, you can remind me of that, of this time next year. If Chase Young is raking in a 5-year, $100 million contract because the dude was third in the NFL in sacks and just absolutely blew up. But if the Bucs want to expose him, it shouldn't be hard. And if Rachaad White wants to have a huge day against the New Orleans Saints, both times that they meet, run right at him. Because he can't stop the run. He misses tackles. And overall, he's pretty ineffective. There's a reason that a team like the Commanders, the way they were last year, traded him. And there's a reason that a team like the San Francisco 49ers didn't want him back. But as far as signings across the NFC South, this move doesn't even crack the top 10 of most impactful for the team. But time will tell who was right and who was wrong. That is going to do it for this episode. Please make sure you are coming back tomorrow. I'll be joined by Evan Klosky of 10 Tampa Bay as we continue to get his reaction to the way things are shaping up for the Buccaneers. In the meantime, check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.